let's get into a question that was submitted ahead of time using the form that we sent out to our members. It's a question from Peter, and it says, what kind of processing is done for musicians in-ears? So first, maybe we define what in-ears could mean. And there are two different worlds that are related, but maybe different in the way we treat them. So in-ears, when I hear it as a person who's worked primarily in live sound, I think in-ear monitors for somebody on stage. It was in the past common to have floor wedges, which is a speaker just blasting the musician's own microphones back at them so that they can hear themselves. And over time, we've, in an effort to decrease stage volume, moved from physical speakers on the stage for musicians to hear themselves to in-ear monitors. So now it's extremely quiet. The potential for feedback is reduced. And if we answer this question from that perspective, we might get answers that cater to live sound. But then, of course, in-ears also exist in the studio, right, Gabe?
Yeah, they can. I mean, you can use in-ear monitors for the stage in a studio instead of headphones. Sometimes I'll have headphones are referred to as in-ears because it's the music in your ears as opposed to the music in the room, which is different. And it also refers to the idea that like you're hearing something and you're reacting to what you're hearing in your ears versus where it might be existing elsewhere and talked about and thought about elsewhere. But yeah, so how would that be processed? I mean, in your experience with live sound, Kyle, how do you typically process sound in ears? Do you do anything differently for in-ears?
I think that with monitors, panning is not really a thing. And I believe that newer systems have become extremely advanced in terms of immersive mixes for an in-ear mix. But I'm drawn to what's the same between them, live or in studio. And I think what's the same is that you process the in-ears to serve the comfort of the performer, right? You want it, just like any mix, you might use EQ as one of the styles of processing to make it a clear and balanced mix for the person, just as you would any front of house mix or whatever, so that things aren't masking other things and so that they can hear what they need to hear. And then you may also add some sort of like reverb or even delay to help them feel like they're not so raw, and that what the audience is hearing is something that sounds cool. On the same note, I think the audience mix, we can go a little bit further in how we treat it, because that's the audience is just listening, whereas the performer is almost comping with what they're hearing, right? They're listening and adjusting how they sing, for example, based on what they hear. So if you put a lot of compression on the vocal, that might sound great in the front of house mix, but it may give the vocalist an unrealistic understanding of the dynamics that they're actually providing into the microphone, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's we could get into science of perception too. I mean, there's actually a term that's used in immersive in science there. It's called in-your-headedness, which is referring to what happens when you pan something in the middle, like mono, in a pair of headphones. Is that like you imagine that sound as being like somehow inside of your head? Like it's not actually. It's different than when you're dealing with a sound in speakers, right? In speakers, you it sounds like it's out in front of you, like because the speakers are in front of you. So you get what's called it's due to something called crossfeed, and it projects the sound out in front of you as opposed to and in the center as opposed to like inside of your head in the center. And that's important when you're dealing in stage stuff. It does come up because when it's in your head, it can feel weird. Oh, there he is on the right side of me now. Oh, now left side. Okay, I can't hear you now. Lost your audio.
Yeah, fader. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Also, the noise floor is quite high in your.
That's what I just did. I turned off my heat. It just kicked on. So
gotcha.
It'll turn off in a second.
Okay. But anyway, I mean that's a key thing for processing as a whole. But I also think there's something important about low end in headphones. That's in ears that I process low end differently for in ears than I do. Because you when you are in ears, it's very easy to reproduce low end, much more so than if you have to drive, say, speakers to create low end, and you're not fighting anomalies, acoustic anomalies in a room. So you actually get an improvement in clarity in low end just by having in ears as opposed to trying to get that low end to reverberate in a room or a space or even from a speaker in front of you. So there's that. And as Kyle was alluding to, compression for in ears can be deceiving because suddenly you're pushing up things like noise floor and subtlety. And stage acting is different than film acting. Um, when you're acting on a stage, you big makeup, big gestures, everything really big. When you're acting on film, the slightest eyebrow twitch can be like a huge thing because the camera's so panned in, and that's a lot what it's like in the studio. So, when you're approaching compression, all that nuance that you're bringing forward suddenly plays a bigger role in the music you're making. Whereas on stage, you're really just kind of when you use compression, you're just trying to keep the peaks from getting too dynamic, and you might be using other dynamics processors like gates and things like that, which do play a role in the studio, but not with proper mic placement. It's not necessarily as used as it might be in live. So there's a lot of differences, but I think what the spirit of the question is maybe asking like, well, what would I anticipate? And I just want to back up to a higher perspective here and just say that there's just so many tools that are used to solve problems. And I think you have to figure out what the problem is that you're trying to solve and then figure out the right tools. And some live in-ear sessions, you don't have much. And then other times you have lots to do. And then there's other stuff like, click tracks,
Mhm.
um, I've done, I mean, there are some jobs I've done where if it weren't for a click track in someone's in ears, the whole thing wouldn't even be able to happen. I'm talking about like live broadcast for TV stuff, where you've got we're streaming live TV for millions, and you've got a band playing on stage, and I hope I'm not spoiling anything here by saying there's a lot of times there's pre-recorded tracks, right? So those musicians need to have those elements and be able to play along to them so that they look like they're really playing their instrument when in fact the instrument in front of them makes no sound because it's just TV prop stuff. So you have to, there's challenges there that in-ears play a very valuable role in. They're different challenges than a live concert, maybe. But some of those things still show up in live concerts too. It's not uncommon to have, you know, what were called rainy day vocals or, tracks that are pre-canned and ready to go if the vocalist isn't feeling up to it that day. Um, and there's ethics we could talk to about that, but that's not really the spirit of the question. I'm trying to just say there's lots of reasons why you might process in ears for lots of different problems. And as you come into contact with those problems, you kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that if you are a performer yourself, experimentation with how you hear it could be really helpful because I think a lot of performers probably don't know what they don't know, especially at certain levels, entry level. So a vocalist may not be able to tell. In my experience, a musician on stage will always be able to tell you, I want more or less of something, but do I want it? It's a little boomy right now. May not be something that they would say, or could you add a little bit of reverb? They
Right.
may say things like, it sounds a little dry, or,
Hmm.
I feel a little detached or something like that. And I
Hmm.
think those are maybe the issues is like lack of clarity,
Hmm.
might be one key issue that you'll run into. And that could often be fixed with, the tools you use,
Right.
EQ, whatever. And then I think like detachment from the space, especially if
Hmm.
someone is used to listening with a floor wedge or something like that, that's in a room that they feel in their body. When you put that just in their ears, maybe they're going to feel a little bit separated from everything.
Hmm.
And I think then, you say, how would you create cohesiveness in a mix with an instrument that's like a virtual instrument versus an acoustically recorded instrument? Maybe some of those same tools could apply, some
Yeah.
spatial and time-based reverb or
Yeah.
delay or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. They also help with that in your headedness that I was talking about. Like it gives
Yes.
it gives you some walls so it's not just existing in a vacuum in between your eyeballs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'll leave it with saying that I wouldn't urge you to make the in-ear mix with the same mentality of a front of house mix, because really,
Mm.
like, I think that maybe sometimes you would play an in-ear mix and it would sound great as if something you would put on a record. But I think more often the vocalist is going to have a little bit more vocal than you would put in the front of house mix. And the guitarist might have a little bit more guitar. People tend to want to hear themselves,
Mm.
so that
Mm.
they can hear the articulation of their instruments.
Well, that's a good point, Kyle. Actually, this is one thing that I deal with a lot with my students. And when you master, I feel like if you master this, it's like you're leveling up. Is that my how do I say this? I'm not actually, I don't have to filter myself so much. I'm going to be blunt. Um, Musicians come into a studio or even on a live stage and they think they want to have an auditory experience that's based on how they understand the music they're making. What's tricky with in-ears, as Kyle is saying, is like it doesn't sound the same as the front of house. And if you don't know what your audience is hearing or can't trust what your audience is hearing, then you can't make decisions on stage that are going to play well to the audience because you don't know how to predict that. And so if you just approach in-ear monitor mixes as like, I'll just do whatever they ask me to do, and that can be a mistake. And what I always try to encourage my students to do, especially in the studio, but also live, is to first mix for myself in ears. And I'll do the front of house mix, from sound check for a little bit, and then I'll get things where I think they should be, and then I put in a pair of my own in-ear monitors, and I'll mix for myself, and then that's what I'm going to start sending to everyone else, so that I know what they're hearing, and that what I'm hearing is informed by what I'm hearing from the front of house position. And then if they want a little more or a little less of something, I'm making small adjustments to that. Otherwise, it's often the case that like they'll just be like, I don't want to hear Doug, the bass player. He's, who gives a shit what he's playing? But the truth is, it's really important. And
Yeah.
so I always start with everybody there, and then if I have to peel back, I'll peel back before I'll add much. Generally, I find that if you take the time to build a solid mix first, that's informed from the front of house, they feel more in touch with the audience. They get more instant feedback from the audience because they know how it translates better. And they're not asking for much up or down because I'm doing most of the balancing work up front for them. Um, so, I mean, those are things that, they're very important elements to the job, because if you don't do that right, then they can't perform in a way that connects to what the audience hears. And then that's like, it's like it's not really playing live. You're kind of playing via jumbotron,
Yeah.
and a lot can get lost in the translation of that.